This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Over the past few months on this channel, I've been talking a lot about short-lived and forgotten Marvel animated series, most recently the 1999 show Spider-Man Unlimited. And in that video I made reference to another series that would later attempt to bring to life Peter Parker's trials and tribulations, in an attempt to capitalise off the success of the now iconic 2002 film. That show was MTV's Spider-Man The New Animated Series, which aired from July to September of 2003. And it got me thinking, this show has kind of become forgotten about in the years since its final airing, and it's only fair that we should dive into it and decide whether or not it's worth re-examining and re-watching all these years later. So in this video, I want to explain the real-world origins and the original ideas for the new Spider-Man animated series, how this show attempted to build off and further explore the world of the original Sam Raimi directed film, how the show attempted to differ itself from all of the other Spider-Man shows that came before it, and the overall legacy that this series has crafted in the 17 years after it first swung onto television screens. So, as I noted in the video looking at Spider-Man Unlimited, much of what led to this series being created came out of the fallout of the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series. You see, when that show eventually concluded in early 1998, Marvel began to quickly develop plans to capitalise on it with a brand new show for the web-slinger. It was also around this time that series development had begun on a feature film adaptation for the character. Various attempts had been made in years prior to get a Spider-Man movie off the ground, but in April of 1999, Columbia Pictures obtained the rights to bring the character to life, hiring director Sam Raimi the following year. Now, with the movie set for a May 2002 release date, Sony looked to capitalise on its inevitable success with a supplemental animated series. Originally, Sony and Marvel considered producing a direct adaptation of the recently released Ultimate Spider-Man comic book series, even hiring its writer Brian Michael Bendis to produce the show for Sony Pictures Television. Plans were eventually changed though as a result of the movie's incredible success, and the show eventually became a direct tie-in to the film series, attempting to bridge the gap between the original 2002 movie and its upcoming 2004 sequel. Bendis remained on board as a producer, and the show evolved into Spider-Man The New Animated Series, titled clearly to distinguish itself from the original 1994 show. Following the lives of Peter Parker, Mary Jane Watson and Harry Osborn after the events of the recently released film, with the trio attending Empire State University, and Peter attempting to balance his studies, his romance with MJ working at the Daily Bugle, and of course saving New York from a wide array of costumed criminals. With the show airing on MTV, it's unsurprising that it attempted to cater to a more teenage demographic, focusing heavily on the interpersonal drama between the likes of Peter, Harry and MJ, featured more colourful and suggestive language and imagery, and completely omitted Aunt May in order to keep the focus on the younger characters. In a lot of ways, it attempted to blend the sensibilities of the Sam Raimi films with the very modern and realistic tone of the incredibly popular Ultimate comic series. And on the 11th of July 2003, Spider-Man The New Animated Series first premiered on MTV, showing off its unique computer-generated and cel-shaded art style, a noticeable departure from the style of any of the previous animated shows, and aimed to tell a fresh yet incredibly modern take on the classic stories of the friendly neighbourhood superhero. But the question remains, did it deliver? So, diving into the initial 13 episode season of the new animated series, one of the first things that stood out to me was actually the voice cast. Now, the main trio, Peter, Harry and MJ, are voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, Ian Ziering and Lisa Loeb, and I think all of them do a solid job at bringing their characters to life, especially Harris. The guest characters though are what really stands out to me as interesting. Keith Carradine voices J. Jonah Jameson, Michael Clarke Duncan reprises his role from the Daredevil movie as the Kingpin, Michael Dorn as Kraven the Hunter, and possibly the most fascinating casting choice of all time, Rob Zombie as the Lizard. The show essentially picks up after the events of the film. Peter has moved out of Aunt May's home and, alongside his closest friends, began studying at Empire State University. His attempts to develop a better relationship with Mary Jane strain from his responsibilities as Spider-Man, the classic love triangle with Harry, and the arrival of a new love interest, Indy, an amalgamation of characters such as Gwen Stacy and Betty Brant. While his friendship with Harry is also tested due to the former's hatred of Spider-Man over his father's death, the constant strain that being the wall crawler puts on every other aspect of Peter's life. It's really evident throughout a lot of this show, with Peter constantly forced to choose between his heroic responsibilities and his personal desires. One of the most memorable episodes for me was The Party, written by Brian Michael Bendis, which sees Peter's childhood friend Max transform into the villainous Electro. This was the first episode developed for the show, and originally conceived as the pilot, and it very much sets the tone for what the rest of the show would become, with a lot of heavy, mature themes, and a lot more violence than you'd expect to see from this type of cartoon. And as it's written by Bendis, this episode felt more in line with the Ultimate comics of the time, with Peter forced to fight Electro and take him down, but also wanting to protect and look after his former friend. The Lizards episode, entitled Law of the Jungle, is also quite interesting, as despite the show's attempts to maintain the continuity of the films, it actually sees Dr. Connors not only become the Lizard, but die at the end of the episode. And while his role in the series overall is fairly small, I definitely enjoyed the use of Michael Clarke Duncan as the Kingpin in the episode Royal Scam, essentially bridging the worlds of the Raimi Spider-Man movies and the recently released 2003 Daredevil film. The two-part finale entitled Mind Games is what I want to particularly focus on though, as I think they demonstrate a lot of the strengths and weaknesses of this series overall. In these two episodes, Spidey faces off against the telepathic Gaines twins, with the villains brain-blasting Peter to the point where he believes that Kraven the Hunter had actually killed Mary Jane Watson. Peter seeks revenge, attempting to execute Kraven before eventually relenting, realising the monster that vengeance was turning him into. He then confronts the twins, only to be brainwashed and almost kills his girlfriend Indy, who is left comatose after Peter attempts to throw her from a building. Spider-Man's horrific actions turn the entire city against him, with a dejected and defeated Peter eventually giving up the superhero life altogether, with the episode ending with Peter throwing his costume into the Hudson River and completely walking away from his responsibilities. This episode is incredibly dark for an animated superhero television series, and left the door open for countless interesting and unique stories to be told in following episodes. How would Peter grapple with his guilt and become Spider-Man once again? Can he win back the trust of his friends and the city? And what new villains will emerge to try and defeat the Wallcrawler once and for all? A lot of questions were raised, but unfortunately, none of them could ever be answered. Following the conclusion of its 13-episode run in September 2003, MTV decided that the show wasn't going to get a second season, believing that its viewing figures didn't quite live up to its expectations. It's somewhat a shame as well, as director Brendan Vietti has stated that plans were already in place for a second season, with a heavy focus on Kraven the Hunter as a main antagonist, and introducing other villains into the show such as Mysterio and the Vulture. Overall though, I do appreciate the creators' attempts to take the character into this more mature direction. With the show being aired on MTV as opposed to Fox Kids like the two previous shows, the writers were allowed more leeway to tell darker stories, and have more creative freedom as a whole, resulting in the abundance of new original characters that appeared throughout the show. And while in retrospect it might date the series slightly, I think the show deserves credit for its animation style. Mainframe Entertainment, the studio who brought the series to life for Sony, took a very experimental approach for the time, using cel shading and CGI to differentiate itself from the art styles of any previous Spider-Man show, but also attempt to translate the look and feel of the modern Spider-Man comics into the world of animation. It was definitely ahead of its time in this regard, and the series was even nominated for 2 Annie Awards for its animation and storyboarding. And while personally it doesn't rank as one of my favourite versions of the character, I do think that Spider-Man the New Animated Series has a lot of very redeeming and interesting qualities about it that make the show a fascinating look at bringing the character to life in a more adult context. It might not be the beloved classic like the 1994 show or spectacular Spider-Man after it, but I think this series brought a lot of interesting ideas to the table, and it is somewhat a shame that its story couldn't fully play out, because when its first season concluded, it left Peter Parker in a place that we'd rarely seen him in any of his various adaptations. As a whole though, Spider-Man the new animated series may not be a masterpiece, but it might be worth revisiting some 17 years after it first aired, just to experience this attempt at bringing the world of the friendly neighbourhood superhero into the teenage landscape of the early 21st century, with a unique style and feel to it that definitely sets itself apart from any Spider-Man adventure that came either before or after it. I'd like to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for curious and creative people. They have fantastic classes on everything from creative writing, video editing, photography, and so many other things. For example, I've just started taking Ryan Booth's class, DIY Cinematography, Make Your Video Look Like a Movie, and I found it really useful in helping me discover new ways to approach making videos. For only $10 a month with an annual subscription, you can do all of these classes and more. And for the first 1,000 people to click the link in this video's description, you'll get a 2-month free trial of the premium membership to unlock your creativity and start learning today. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know your thoughts on everything we talked about in today's video. I can't wait to hear what you have to say as always. If you're new to Owen Likes Comics, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos we upload on the channel. And if you want some more videos, there should be some other ones on screen right now that you might also enjoy. If you want some more of me, you can follow me on Twitter just at Owen Likes Comics, and if you want to help support the channel, you can go to patreon.com/OwenLikesComics to do just that. But that's all for me. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you next time. So until then, take care and keep reading.